Judges classes, you will get so excited about the book of Judges. This is one of my absolute favorite books, and every time I read it, I'm just seeing more and more masterful genius in the way that this is assembled and put together and structured. And I think we've talked about it in other Sunday school classes, how narrative is very different in terms of how it conveys truth and what it communicates to us. It can be much more exciting, because who wouldn't rather listen to a story than a sermon, right? So it's exciting, but drawing out what those truths are just really requires a careful eye and learning to see how the pieces fit together. And so you'll find great stuff. And if I remember correctly, I might be wrong, but I think there is one segment of the book of Judges, something to do with Samson, that is the Old Testament lesson in one Sunday of the 3-year lectionary, which means that out of every 3 years, you're only reading one little bit of the book of Judges once. And if the pastor doesn't preach on the Old Testament text that day, there's a very good chance you've gone your whole life and you've never heard a sermon on the Judges. It's a foreign book to most people. They know the story from Sunday school of Samson and maybe a couple others, Deborah or Gideon, but most of it's going to be very foreign to people. So as we dig into it, I think you will get very excited. This stuff is fantastic. This is an hour class, and now we've only got 35 minutes, so we won't have time to dig into everything, but I hope we can walk through a lot of it. Let's start with a word of prayer. Lord, as we look at your people and the way they acted and the way they responded to you, show us in the mirror of the law our own failures and shortcomings, that we will repent with truly sincere hearts, knowing that we are no better than any other people in any other time. But show us also, Lord, in these judges and these deliverers, the promise of the one who would ultimately deliver us from all our sins, set us free to know you, our Savior Jesus Christ. In his name we pray. Amen. Okay. How to do all this? I said I wouldn't get up. If you look at a map, though, the period of the judges, you want to just get a sense on the Bible timeline of when that is, right? So Moses leads the people through the Red Sea when they come out of Egypt. They wander in the wilderness for 40 years. Now it's time to come into Canaan and claim the promised land. And Moses is not allowed in, so who leads them into Canaan? Joshua, right? And then at the end of, we'll see this in the text, at the end of Joshua's life, then there's a period between from that point until the very first king, who was King Saul, was the first king of Israel. From the time of Joshua to Saul is the period of judges, where the people of Israel are kind of, you could say, governed or led by these men that God raises up to be judges. So that's the time frame. It's a very wild time. It's a crazy time in history. A lot of amazing things are happening. I think for the sake of time, I'm not going to read the whole chapter up front. I'm going to read it as we go. But a few things that I want you to notice right away. So what you have here, this is just straightforward text. This comes right out of the Bible, Judges 1:1 through 2:5. I don't have any questions or anything else added in there. I'm just looking at the scripture. But I tried to color code some things that I want you to see as you look at this section of text, so you notice it right away. So you see the parts that are in red. How many parts in red? 4. Okay, we're not all 100% with me. That was an easy one. 4. I highlighted those in red because those are the places in this section of text where the Lord is speaking or acting. So you want to pay special attention to what God is doing. Those are going to be important clues in our understanding of what's going on in the text. So just look at them briefly. The first one is in verse 2. The Lord answered. Well, I'll read verse 1 so you get the context, right? So after the death of Joshua, the Israelites asked the Lord, "Who of us is to go up first to fight against the Canaanites?" So you understand their question there? There's how many tribes? 12. If you look at the two maps that I have, those are side-by-side maps of roughly the same place. But the map on the left shows roughly who the people were that lived there before the Israelites came in. You see that? So while the Israelites were wandering in the wilderness, and finally they come up around to the east side of the Dead Sea there and enter into the Promised Land, who was living there? See that? Canaanites, Hittites, Jebusites, Philistines, all these foreign people that were in the land. The map on the right shows you in the color, those are the 12 tribes, right? And those are the areas that are allotted to those 12 tribes in the book of Joshua. So if you've read Joshua recently, you remember that there's a big section of the book of Joshua where God says, okay, when you go in the Promised Land, this tribe here is going to have from here to here to here in these cities. And this tribe, it allots where the land is going to be. This is what God has given. So what's the problem looking at those two maps side by side? One is what God promised and said, this is what you're going to get. The other is, who's living there now? Yeah, people that are already there. The new ones can't move in until the old ones move out, right? We're gonna address that. I hope we have time to. I just feel very rushed. I'm sorry. I hope we have time to dig into that appropriately. So verse 2, they've asked, who's going to be the first ones to fight? The Lord answered, Judah shall go up. I have given the land into their hands. So the first time God speaks, what does he say? I want Judah to fight, and I'm going to make sure that they win. I'm going to give it to them. Go down to the second section in red, all the way down in verse 19. You see that? What does it tell us? The Lord was with the men of Judah. So he said, Judah, you go fight. When Judah fought, what happened? God was with them. Look at verse 22. Now the tribes of Joseph attacked Bethel. So the beginning is going to be Judah and Simeon, as we'll see when we read it. Now the tribes of Joseph attack. Who are the tribes of Joseph? Ephraim and Manasseh. These were the sons of Joseph. They each inherited their own tribes. It says, and the Lord was with them. So now the second wave of tribes launched their attack. And God is blessing them. He's helping them defeat the people that are already there. This is all in line with what God said to Moses, right? God told them, this is your promised land. When you go in there, you're going to have to fight these folks. I'm going to help you. I am giving you this land. And we see God helping them, God being with them. But go down to the bottom. We're not going to read it just now. But there's that long section of text in red, and that is the angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochim and said. So the angel of the Lord is speaking to them. Now the first three sections in red, God is helping them. God's telling them what to do. Everything is looking really good. That last section in red, we're going to discover that something went wrong. This is the angel of the Lord telling them, you guys messed up, and now you're going to have problems. We'll go into those details. But what are the problems? Look at the section immediately preceding it. So from verse 27 to the end of chapter 1. You see the highlighted but Manasseh? Nod your heads if you see that, so you're with me. All right, and I put some things there in purple, so I just want them to leap out at you. But Manasseh did not drive out. Go to the next purple. He never drove them out completely. Verse 29. Nor did Ephraim drive out. Verse 30. Neither did Zebulun drive out. Verse 31. Nor did Asher drive out. Verse 32. Purple did not drive them out. Verse 33. Neither did Naphtali drive out. So, something's being repeated there. What do we see being repeated? That they did not drive out the inhabitants of the land. And that is going to be the big failure on the part of the Israelites that results in that final red section where the angel of the Lord tells them in 14. Are you with me? Kind of see this? All right. Start at verse 1. After the death of Joshua, the Israelites asked the Lord, "Who of us is to go up first to fight against the Canaanites?" The Lord answered, "Judah shall go up. I have given the land into their hands." Verse 3, the men of Judah then said to the Simeonites, their fellow Israelites, "Come up with us into the territory allotted to us to fight against the Canaanites. We in turn will go with you into yours." So the Simeonites went with them. If you look down at the map on the right, you see kind of the orangish gold-colored section that was given to Judah. And then there's a section, kind of like a little island of land right within it. You see that? That belongs to Simeon. So they kind of shared roughly in the same area. So Judah says, "Hey, well, you help us, and then we'll help you when it's time." Sounds good, right? Good deal. Verse 4, when Judah attacked, the Lord gave the Canaanites and Perizzites into their hands, and they struck down 10,000 men at Bezek. It was there that they found Adonibezek and fought against him, putting to rout the Canaanites and Perizzites. Adonibezek fled, but they chased him and caught him and cut off his thumbs and big toes. Then Adonibezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off have picked up scraps under my table. Now God has paid me back for what I did to them. They brought him to Jerusalem, and he died there. The men of Judah attacked Jerusalem also and took it. They put the city to the sword and set it on fire. Okay, so some things that you want to see here. Flip open in your Bibles to Deuteronomy chapter 7 while I'm talking. So one of the things that you can't help but notice as you become acquainted with the Old Testament is the barbarity. In the New Testament, we have these sweet stories of gentle Jesus bringing children to him that he might touch them. Sweet Jesus, gentle and mild, preaching, love your neighbors, love your enemies, do good to those who persecute. It's an ethics-based religion in the minds of some folks that don't fully understand it. That just sounds positive, good, and appeals to our human hearts. And then you go in the Old Testament, and you have these destruction. Did you go to Deuteronomy chapter 7? Would somebody read? You feel brave enough to read these names, or just want to wait for me to look it up? I'll just look it up. Okay, thanks. All right, Deuteronomy 7, verse 1. When the Lord your God brings you into the land that you are entering to take possession of it, and clears away many nations before you. By the way, who's writing Deuteronomy? When is this being given? This is Moses, right? So this is before Joshua goes in. This is before the period of Judges. This is all God telling them what to expect when they get to the promised land. When the Lord your God brings you into the land that you are entering to take possession of it, and clears away many nations before you. The Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. 7 nations more numerous and mightier than you. And when the Lord your God gives them over to you, and you defeat them, then you must devote them to complete destruction. You shall make no covenant with them, and show no mercy to them. You shall not intermarry with them, giving your daughters to their sons, or taking their daughters for your sons, for they would turn away your sons from following me to serve other gods. Then the anger of the Lord would be kindled against you, and he would destroy you quickly. But thus shall you deal with them. You shall break down their altars, and dash in pieces their pillars, and chop down their asherim, and burn their carved images with fire. For you are a people holy to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for his treasured possession out of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth. So God tells them when they come into the promised land, here's these 7 nations. They were supposed to be completely destroyed. They were supposed to be wiped out. And they were not allowed to make any kind of covenant with them. Flip over to Deuteronomy chapter 20. Deuteronomy 20. I'm going to start at verse 10. When you draw near to a city to fight against it, offer terms of peace to it, and if it responds to you peaceably, and it opens to you, then all the people who are found in it shall do forced labor for you, and shall serve you. But if it makes no peace with you, but makes war against you, then you shall besiege it. And when the Lord your God gives it into your hand, you shall put all its males to the sword, but the women and the little ones, the livestock, and everything else in the city, all its spoil, you shall take as plunder for yourselves. You shall enjoy the spoil of your enemies, which the Lord your God has given you. Thus you shall do to all the cities that are very far from you, which are not cities of the nations here. Verse 16. But in the cities of these people that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance, you shall save alive nothing that breathes, but you shall devote them to complete destruction. The Hittites and the Amorites, the Canaanites and the Perizzites, the Hivites and the Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded, that they may not teach you to do according to all their abominable practices that they have done for their gods, and so you sin against the Lord your God. So, before they come in, as they're on their way to the promised land, if they come to a city, and the city says, we'll make peace with you, what did they have the option to do? They could make them slaves. Or that's what forced labor is, right? They could be slaves of the Israelites. If they did not agree to that, the Israelites could defeat them, and every man was to be killed, but the women and the children and the animals could be their plunder. But when they come to the promised land, the land that God said, this is your land that I'm giving you, what were they supposed to do with those cities and those nations? Wipe them out. Not man, not woman, child, not the dog, not the cat, not the goldfish. Nothing was to be allowed to live. Now, if you have never come to grips with this, there is an aspect of the Christian faith that you're still reaching to understand. If people deal with this, they say, oh, this is the Old Testament. But now we're in the New Testament. And the implication there is that God has kind of changed. He's softened a little bit. He was this mean guy in the Old Testament that said, now he's a little easier going. He doesn't see this. Or the atheists love this. If you get in a discussion with the atheists and you're ignorant of this, you will see this big grin grow on their face as soon as they can whip open your Bible and start showing you the kind of God you believe in. A God who would kill innocent children and women and even animals. Horrible. So you've got to come to grips with this. God demands that they be destroyed totally and utterly. Before we even get it back into the text, what should we make of that? What do we think of this? We just don't have time to look up all the scriptures I'd like to show you. But here's one of the things that Moses explains to us in the Old Testament. That part of the reason those nations were to be destroyed is because of the great evils they had done. In other words, their destruction at the hands of God's people, the Israelites, was partly God's punishment upon them because they were so evil. What kind of evil did they do? Well, it enumerates some of this. For example, in Leviticus 16, they had. Yeah, I was saving that one for last. Right, they had every kind of sex imaginable, every kind imaginable, and worst of all, they threw their own babies into the fires as sacrifices to their gods. They worshiped these false gods, horrible gods. They were so evil that God said they must be destroyed. What you have to see in the Bible is how seriously God takes sin. When we sin against God, when people sin against God and commit idolatry, it is such an affront and such an offense to God that the punishment is to be absolutely wiped out and obliterated. And not just, the punishment of sin is vicarious. It affects people all around you. You see that, right? You see people who are engaged in sin, Wouldn't it be great if they were the only ones who suffered for it? But who else suffers for it?
Everybody.
Their families, their community, their sins, spreads. And so God takes sin so seriously, he wants you to see this. This is how much I hate sin, that when you sin, you commit idolatry, you must be destroyed. And now in the New Testament, we think, well, God softened up a little. Thank God. We don't have a warrant to kill idolaters anymore, just so you know that, right? I can't run down here to the local tavern, and when they start singing a song to a false god, pull up AK-47 you can't do that. But it's not because God now has softened on sin. It's not because God is easier going about sin. He's more serious about it. In other words, the Bible gives us a progressive revelation. It progressively reveals more and more about who God is. It can't just lay it all out there for us because it's too much for us to understand. We see the truth about God being revealed little by little, more and more, until the fullness of God is revealed in Jesus Christ. Yes. So, in the Old Testament, he says this is how bad sin is. You commit idolatry, you destroy. In the New Testament, what does he say? This is how serious sin is. You will suffer eternal torment in the lake of fire forever and ever. In other words, the New Testament doesn't scale back, take it easy. The New Testament ratchets it up. The punishment is even worse. It's not being killed and having your family wiped out. It's suffering eternal separation from the presence of God. So you've got to come to grips with how much God hates sin. And this is part of our problem. This is why we don't go along with it. How could God kill all those innocent people? You say they're not. They deserve this. That's how bad sin is. And so the first story here in Judges helps to highlight that. So I read about Adonibezek, right? So one of the kings that they captured is Adonibezek. Now Adonibezek could be his name. The word Adonibezek means Lord of Bezek. So it could be his title. Maybe he's the king of this country this land called Bezek. And the Canaanites were living in roughly city-states. So when you read about kings, you shouldn't think of like the king of England or the king of France, right? You should think more like the mayor. King Craig Coots of Richmond kind of something. They had a... It's not fair for me to say that.
Who's not here today?
But you had like a city-state, right? So you had a city, a walled city somewhere, and then kind of the area around it. And whoever was in charge of that was the king. So there were probably hundreds of kings there. So Adonibezek would have been one of the greater kings. And so when they captured him, they cut off his thumbs and his big toes. When you cut off someone's big toe, what can't they do anymore? They can't run. You can walk, but you can't run without a big toe. And when you cut off someone's thumb, what can't they do anymore? Yeah, you can't hold the sword or the axe or anything. So one of the reasons in these ancient barbaric cultures that they would cut off big toes and big thumbs is because now you have shown that they're subject. Now they are your slave. Now they can't rebel. It's a way of just driving home to everybody that you beat down. And so the Israelites do this to Adonibezek. Now, it doesn't commend them. Remember, it told us in the Old Testament, we read, they should have put him to death right away. They should have killed him. Instead, they cut off his thumbs and toes. So they did the wrong thing. But what's interesting here is what Adonibezek says. He says, 70 kings have I had collect on their hands and knees, picking up the food that falls off my table with their thumbs and their toes cut off. In other words, he's defeated 70 others. And there's a lot of symbolism in the numbers you'll find in the book of Judges. We'll talk about it more as we go through. But what does the number 7 symbolize in the Bible, generally? Perfection. Why? On the seventh day, God rested. Right? The seventh day symbolizes completion, finality. Everything is good. Everything's right. Everything. So 7 is like the perfect number. And the number 10 represents a large number. A wholeness, a fullness. So 7 times 10 is another way of saying a large and perfect number. So did he actually subjugate 70 kings? I mean, probably did. I don't know. But there's symbolism in the number 2. It's a way of saying he has just kind of subjugated everybody. He beat them all down. And he cut their thumbs off. And he cut their toes off. And now what has happened to him? He's had his thumbs and toes cut off. And so he recognizes that it's the Lord's way of paying him back. So when we read about the destruction that's coming upon the Canaanites, the very first story functions to remind us of what the Old Testament has already told us, that this destruction coming on the Canaanites is God paying them back for the large and perfect destruction that they have wrought in the text. Do you kind of see that? It's powerful, isn't it? Just this little story in here about Donna Bezic. It's not a little side story. You see how it functions right at the beginning to tell us that? Okay, let's go on. Oh boy, we're going to run out of time. After that, Judah, in verse 9, after that, Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites living in the hill country, the Negev, and the western foothills. Advanced against the Canaanites living in Hebron, formerly called Kiriath Arba, and defeated Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai. From there, they advanced against the people living in Debir, formerly called Kiriath Sephir. And Caleb said, all right, who's Caleb? Now we're just throwing in this new character. Who was Caleb? Yeah, my mom, when she went to Israel for a year, when I was much younger, she lived in Israel for a year. She took care of this Christian man's house while he was going around the world speaking. And part of her job involved taking care of his animals. He had a big golden retriever, and he had 2 parrots. And my mom used to say when she came back, she said, she talked about Lance's 2 parrots, and one parrot was named Caleb. So she said, you know what the name of the other parrot was? Everybody would say, Joshua. She'd laugh and she'd say, no, it was Golda. But you should always think of Caleb and Joshua and Caleb. Why? What's the story about Joshua and Caleb? They were the spies. I have it written down, but we just don't have time to look it up. But they went into the new promised land and spied out the land and came back and said, oh, the land's flowing with milk and honey. Yeah, there's giants in the land. Yeah, the people of the land don't like us, but don't worry, God promised to give it to us and he'll give it to us. The other 10 spies all said, oh, we're not going to be able to take these people. They're too tough for us. We can't handle them. And they didn't trust in the Lord. So we just don't have time to look it up. If you want to look it up later, you could look up Numbers chapter 14 and Joshua chapter 15. But God said later on, none of the people who rebelled against him were going to get into the promised land. That's why they wandered for 40 years, remember? So that all the people would die off who rebelled against the Lord and didn't trust him, except for Joshua and Caleb. And God said, because of their faithfulness and their trust in him, their ancestors would receive a great blessing in the promised land, an inheritance that would stay with them forever. So, what did I say? Ancestors? Thank you. They're descendants. So verse 12, and here we're introduced to Caleb, and Caleb said, I will give my daughter Aksa in marriage to the man who attacks and captures Kiriath Sephir, which is the town of Hebron. We just saw that, right? So Othniel, son of Canaan, Caleb's younger brother, took it. So Caleb gave his daughter Aksa to him in marriage. So we're not going to learn about Othniel next week, but 2 weeks. Oh, no, wait. 2 weeks. I should remember the schedule. 2 weeks is the lunch, right? The brunch. So there's no Sunday school when we have the brunch at Crandall's, because that's at 11 o'clock. I can't even finish by 10:15. So no Sunday school that day. But the week after, we'll learn the story of Othniel. We're going to read about him again. But Othniel conquers this city, and so Caleb gave his daughter Aksa to him in marriage. Verse 14, one day when she came to Othniel, she urged him to ask her father for a field. When she got off her donkey, Caleb asked her, what can I do for you? She replied, do me a special favor. Since you have given me land in the Negev, give me also springs of water. So Caleb gave her the upper and lower springs. So what we discover is that Caleb's descendants, his daughter, and obviously then her family and their family, they not only are given this nice land and this nice field, they're also given springs of water. How important were springs of water back then? Huge, right? You couldn't live unless you had a source of fresh water. So you were very limited in where you could go. And if you owned water, you were in good stead. My daughter's getting married in August. I'm sorry, I can't give you springs of water. The upper or the lower. But Caleb, his family's well taken care of. So what should this remind us of? God's promise that the one who was faithful, his family receives an inheritance forever. So you see these little stories and how they function to tie us into all the stuff that we were told in Numbers and Deuteronomy and Joshua. We see it happening. Verse 16, the descendants of Moses' father-in-law, the Kenite, went up from the city of palms. Does anyone know what city that is? Jericho. With the people of Judah to live among the inhabitants of the desert of Judah and the Negev near Arad. Then the men of Judah went with the Simeonites, their fellow Israelites, and attacked the Canaanites living in Ziphath. They totally destroyed the city, therefore it was called Ramah. Judah also took Gaza, Ashkelon, and Ekron, each city with its territory. The Lord was with the men of Judah. They took possession of the hill country, but they were unable to drive the people from the plain because they had chariots fitted with iron. Now, I don't have time to go into all of this, but here God was with them, and so they were beating everybody, except we find out they couldn't beat everybody right away. What's that? Well, we won't look it up, but if you were to go back to Exodus chapter 23, you discover that God also predicted this in the days of Moses. He said, I'm going to help you defeat your enemies, but not all at once. Some of them have to be there for a little while, because if they were all destroyed right away, the land would be too wild for you. You wouldn't be able to handle it. So you're going to beat them gradually over time. So here we see that there were some of the Canaanites they didn't defeat right up front, even though the Lord was with them. Verse 20, as Moses had promised, Hebron was given to Caleb, who drove from it the three sons of Anak. The Benjamites, however, did not drive out the Jebusites, who were living in Jerusalem. To this day, the Jebusites lived there with the Benjamites. By the way, when was Jerusalem conquered then and the Jebusites finally kicked out? Who did that? We're told how David did it. So many hundreds of years later, when David was the king, he finally defeated the Jebusites and made Jerusalem the capital. But when he says to this day the Jebusites lived there, that tells us that when this was written, David had not yet done it. Good chronological reference. Verse 22, I already read it. Tribes of Joseph attacked Bethel, and the Lord was with them. When they sent men to spy out Bethel, formerly called Luz, the spies saw a man coming out of the city, and they said to him, show us how to get into the city, and we will see that you are treated well. So he showed them. They put the city to the sword, but spared the man and his whole family. He then went to the land of the Hittites, where he built a city and called it Luz, which is its name to this day. So remember when they attacked Jericho, and the Rahab, the prostitute, helped them. And so Rahab, the prostitute, became an Israelite. And she's even in the lineage of Christ. But here they do kind of the same thing. They get a man, they be kind of their spy, so they can destroy the city of Luz. And they spare the guy that helps them. But he doesn't become an Israel. He goes somewhere else and starts a new city and names it after the old city. It's going to be a thorn in the side of the Israelites. So the Israelites put everyone in old Luz to death except for this guy. Because they didn't fully obey the Lord, they left one little thing undone. They didn't kill this one guy. Now they're going to have a thorn. You see how sin works in your life? You're supposed to do how much of what God commands you? All of it. What if you do most all of it? Almost all of it. You're going to have sand in the craw. All right, now this is very important, and I just don't have time to go through it all. But if you look then at verses 27 to 36, You see now a recounting of how things went for the tribes as they entered into the promised land. And what's the common denominator? What do you see going on here again and again and again?
Purple.
Right. They're winning the battles, but they're not destroying the people. They're not wiping them out, which is what they were told to do. What happens when you compromise with sin in your life? I remember sailors, I would get these sailors, and it's such a chronic problem these days, pornography, because it's so accessible on the internet. So you'd get these sailors, and they'd come in, they're like, it was really hard for them to do this. I know that there were many more that probably had the problem, but a small number that would come in honestly and say, I really struggle with this. I don't know what to do, maybe I could just quit looking at the hardcore sites and just look at the softcore sites. Help me get through it. See how that works, right? It's like giving up smoking. I'll give up smoking, but I gotta have the patch. I just need a little bit of sin. It doesn't work that way with sin. That's not how sin works. If you compromise with it, if you leave a little of it there, you don't deal with it completely, this is what will happen. And so all these tribes failed to drive out the Canaanites like they were supposed to. So then we get to chapter 2. I've got 2 minutes to tie this up. This is important, though. The angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochim. By the way, who was the angel of the Lord? At least the Lord himself, maybe Jesus. We're not so sure. But the angel is the messenger. But you discover that the messenger of the Lord is the Lord. You see that identification. In fact, when he speaks in the first person. I brought you up out of Egypt. Who brought you up out of Egypt? Well, the Lord did not some angel. So I brought you up out of Egypt and led you into the land I swore to give to your ancestors. I said, I will never break my covenant with you. And you shall not make a covenant with the people of this land, but you shall break down their altars. Yet you have disobeyed me. Why have you done this? And I have also said, I will not drive them out before you. They will become traps for you, and their gods will become snares for you. When the angel of the Lord had spoken these things to all the Israelites, the people wept aloud, and they called that place Bochim. The word Bochim means place of weeping, and there they offered sacrifices to the Lord. So in the introduction of the book, what do we discover? The people did not do what they were commanded to do by God. And so God says, I said I would wipe them out. I would drive them out before you. I'd get rid of all of them. But now I'm not going to do that. I'm going to leave them there. And what's going to happen? They're going to become snares. They're going to become traps. The fact that you compromise with them and that now your next door neighbor, metaphorically speaking, is a Baal worshiper, it's going to get you in trouble too. And that's what we're going to see now in the rest of the book of Judges. We're going to see how the Israelites all of a sudden start adopting the religion, the false idolatrous faith of the people around them, and they fall into ruin because they compromise with this and tolerate it. And the whole book is going to show us this story of the Israelites and what happens to them. All right, we are out of time, but I hope you have some sense of just how exciting this book is to see in the people of God the activity of human beings and relationship with their God and how they act. And what you'll discover, I hope I'm being hard on you with the demands of sin, because that's what Scripture requires of us. But ultimately also what you'll see is the grace of God. How with these people who keep sinning, he continues to deliver his grace. All right, thank you, Lord, for our opportunity to be here and to study. Open the eyes of our hearts to comprehend more fully your word and apprehend thereby by faith the one who delivers us from the curse of the law, from sin. Jesus our Lord, in whose name we pray. Amen. Thanks, everybody.